An exposition venue, an Olympic stadium, a permanent home, a temporary home. This place has done a lot. You're watching World Stadium Profiles, and this is the Estadi Olímpic Lluís Companys. More simply known in English as the Barcelona Olympic Stadium, this is one of Spain's largest grounds and a venue which dates back to the 1920s. It was designed by local architect Pere Domènech i Roura initially for the 1929 Barcelona International Exposition, and then ideally in the future as the main venue for an Olympic Games. Barcelona's first attempt would be for the 1936 Summer Games, which they ultimately missed out on to Berlin. Construction work on the stadium began in April 1927, completed 25 months later, with opening done by King Alfonso XIII on the 20th of May 1929. That opening would include Spain's first ever international rugby union match, a 9-0 win over Italy, as well as a football friendly between the Catalonia national team and English club Bolton Wanderers. The Barcelona combination team would win the match 4-0. The stadium would open under the name Estadi de Montjuïc, a reference to its location in the Olympic Park on Montjuïc. Translated as Jewish Mountain, this is a broad hill in Barcelona which overlooks the Mediterranean, serving as the birthplace of the city and where a historic medieval Jewish cemetery can also be found. Whilst Barcelona missed out on the 1936 Games, plans were still put together for the Estadi de Montjuïc to host a major sporting competition. The People's Olympiad was intended to take place that same year, a protest event to the Summer Olympics that were being held in Nazi-controlled Germany. It was the first ever global attempt to boycott a modern Olympic Games, and despite receiving some support and interest, it had to be cancelled when the Spanish Civil War broke out. The Estadi de Montjuïc would get hosting rights for the 1955 Mediterranean Games, used as a centrepiece for athletics, equestrian, football and field hockey, as well as the opening and closing ceremonies. Its football pedigree grew from hosting several domestic matches over the decades following its opening, with FC Barcelona, Estadi Espanyol and the nowadays lower league club Esportiu Europa all making use of the large stadium. The Montjuïc region itself included a street circuit regularly used for the Spanish Motorcycle Grand Prix in the 50s, 60s and 70s, and its Formula One Spanish Grand Prix in 1969, 1971, 1973 and 1975. The Estadi de Montjuïc would be used as a paddock for teams during these races, the ground itself by this point reaching a stage of disuse and deterioration. The ageing stadium needed a lifeline and got it towards the end of the 20th century. In October 1986, Barcelona finally won the right to host the Olympic Games, beating Paris, Belgrade, Brisbane, Birmingham and Amsterdam to the 1992 edition. The Estadi de Montjuïc and the surrounding park was going to be the centrepiece of the event, prompting a complete redesign and reconstruction. The stadium would be gutted out, though all but the west exterior facade was able to be preserved and form part of the new design. A rebuild between 1985 and 1989 saw new grandstands built on all sides, with the interior lowered by 11 metres. Montjuïc stone that was used in the construction of the original stadium would be extracted and transferred over to the construction of Barcelona's iconic Sagrada Familia. On the 8th of September 1989, King Juan Carlos I opened what was now known as the Estadi Olímpic de Montjuïc, finished in time for that year's World Cup in athletics. Its main event would come 3 years later, used for athletics as well as the opening and closing ceremonies of the 1992 Summer Olympic Games and Paralympic Games. The stadium itself could hold little under 56,000 after its rebuild, with a further 11,000 seats added to temporary use during the Summer Games. The Olympic Stadium's legacy since has focused mainly around football and athletics events. The stadium would become home to Estadi Espanyol in 1997 when the Parakeets had to leave the Estadi de Saraya following financial problems. They would remain in Montjuïc for 12 years before relocating to their modern Estadi Stadium, sat on the outskirts of Cornellà de Llobregat and El Prat de Llobregat. The stadium's Category 4 UEFA status grants it the ability to host plenty of major football matches. Numerous domestic finals have been held in the Barcelona-based ground since first opening in the late 1920s, with the Spanish national team first playing a friendly here against Czechoslovakia on New Year's Day 1930. Athletics legacy has continued post the Olympic Games, with Spanish Athletic Championships, as well as a European Athletics Championship and the World Juniors Athletics Championship during the 2010s. The stadium would get American football experience in the 90s and 2000s, serving as a home for the Barcelona Dragons, who existed between 1991 and 2003. It wasn't the ideal place to gridiron. Pitch regulations meant that for the first 2 years, for instance, the Dragons actually had to play with end zones 3 yards shorter than what are usually permitted in the National Football League. The stadium would in turn get 2 editions of the pre-season American Bowl, hosting the San Francisco 49ers against the Pittsburgh Steelers in 1993 and the Los Angeles Raiders against the Denver Broncos in 1994. It was in 2001 that the Estadi Olímpic Lluís would take its present name. Lluís Companys i Jove is the man the stadium is now named after. He was a Catalan-born politician who served as the president of the government of Catalonia during a period that included all of the Spanish Civil War. He would become a refugee in France in 1939 after his Republican faction were defeated during the conflict, hidden in exile until 1940 when Nazi Germany occupied France and the Gestapo handed him over to Francoist Spanish authorities. Lluís Companys would be executed by firing squad on the 15th of October 1940 at the age of 58. Under its Estadi Olímpic Lluís Companys name, the stadium has seen more sporadic sporting use as opposed to concerts aplenty. International matches in both football and rugby union have featured either Spain or Catalonia, with the Andorra football team using the stadium for 2 high-profile qualifiers against England in the late 2000s. At the time of writing, it is a ground in use as a temporary home by FC Barcelona. The Catalan Giants are playing at the Olympic venue as their own historic Camp Nou undergoes a multi-year renovation process. Barca's first season here was the 2023-24 campaign, with the stadium given a new Barcelona colouring to make it feel less like a home from home for the European powerhouses. Final completion of the Camp Nou renovation isn't expected until the middle of 2026, but the hope is that FC Barcelona can return to their home further northwest at some point in 2025. Maximum capacity of the Estadi Olímpic Lluís Companys at the time of writing sits at 55,926. Have you had the chance to experience the Estadi Olímpic Lluís Companys before? Let us know in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe to the Matchday Man for more stadium profiles like this one. I'll see you then.